So where did Highlife actually come from? We'll get the answers to this question from inquisitive musician, researcher, and chronicler of not just Ghanaian music or Highlife, but West African music. My guest is Professor John Collins. Welcome to History Time. Prof, it's a delight to be able to speak to you about music and history, two of my big passions.
Mine too.
First of all, tell us, how did you get involved with Ghana and Ghanaian music and Highlife?
Well, I actually came here as a child. I was about 8 years old, 1952, before independence, because my father helped set up the philosophy department at Legon. So, you know, Nkrumah, when he became Prime Minister in 1952, he wanted to jumpstart the university, so he brought some expatriates from Oxford and Cambridge. And then my father was one of these expatriates. So that's how I actually came to Ghana. So it wasn't by my own will. It was just I came with my family. And then when I was an adult, I wanted to do a degree and be with my father, because my father had separated. So I wanted to be with my dad in Ghana, because he stayed here for about 30 odd years in the philosophy department. So I did a BA here basically. But I was also a guitarist in a rock band and a jazz band in England. And then my father had married a Ghanaian lady in Adawajiri called my Auntie Amma. And so when I went to visit my stepmother, so I was a young guy, about 23 or something, so I went up to say hello to her. I always carried a guitar, and by coincidence, the leader of the Jaguar Jokers concert party was tenants in her house. So they grabbed me and took me on the road with them in 1969 as a sort of novelty, really. You know, the concert parties, we had about 100 or more in the country. They were very competitive about catching audiences, so they always wanted to have a new novelty. Mm-hmm. So I was the novelty of that moment, for them anyway, yes. As a white person playing Highlife, which I couldn't even play at that time. I had to learn it on the road, but I could play rock and roll and things like this.
So were you infusing some of your rock and roll into the songs they were playing?
Yeah, yes, basically that. Mm-hmm. I'm also a blues harmonica player, and I remember once at one village I played the harmonica, and you know, Mr. Bampo, the Opia, the leader of the Jaguar Jokers, they don't use an organ. It was a guitar band, so he heard this sound like an organ because I was blasting the mouth organ through a microphone, so the sound was very big, and he rushed down to the front because he was collecting the money at the gate. And he was so excited he fell over and injured himself, because where's this organ coming from, you know? But it was all for novelty effect, and basically they opened up my eyes to Highlife, and that's how it started.
So you just basically fell into it?
Yeah, serendipity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where does Highlife come from?
Well, that took me many, many years to discover, because I mean, once I was playing Highlife, I was very inquisitive about where it came from, and there was very little known in those days. Because no books had been written. The university wasn't interested in it. But luckily, the people who actually invented Highlife, many of them were still alive. And so I spent years, and I didn't do it as a research project. They were my friends, and I was interested in the music, and I was a bit perplexed as why these national heroes hadn't been documented. I mean, people like E.T. Mensah, E.K. Nyami, Kwa Mensah, they all became friends of mine. And I started taking biographies. And then what I was very lucky was maybe sometimes I asked them, but they would volunteer to take me to the generation before them. For instance, let me give you an example. Mm-hmm. E.T. Mensah. I met him actually, again serendipity. I was in a band with some Ghanaians and Lebanese, and one singer was called Obi, and he was the singer for E.T. Mensah. So he took me to the old man. We became friends. And E.T. was in his 50s, so he'd come to that time in life where he thought somebody should document his life. So luckily I was around, so I started to do that. So he took me to the older generation before him. I talked to people who were playing in bands in Accra, Cape Coast and other places in the 1920s, or even before, from 1914, 1916, the Jazz Kings, 1914, the Excelsior Orchestra. I met all these guys. And then, of course, I met Guy Warren. He was a little bit Kofi Ganaba.
Yes, Ganaba.
But he was a little bit young. He was more the age of E.T. Mensah. And I met people like Frank Torto, Squire Addo, who was a ragtime and highlife pianist in the 1920s. So I actually met the people, and Kwa Mensah also, I met Kwame Mensah, who's the nephew of Kwame Asari, who sort of invented the Amponsa song. So I was able to get the oral history going back at least to about 1900. And then there was a couple of Ghanaians who were, I can mention their names because I became friends with them, because there were so few, the Ghanaians who were interested in Highlife. Efwa Sutherland, who was a friend of my dad's. So she helped me a lot about orientating me in terms of what was the concert party. She introduced me, for instance, to Bob Johnson. And then there was, there was Atana Mensah, who was again a friend of my father, and done research into the origin of a very early form of brass band highlife that developed in Cape Coast in the 1890s, called Adaha. This was before the word highlife. The word highlife wasn't invented until the 1920s. So we had it in Ghana under different names. Sibi Saba, or Osibi Saba, which is the fancy guitar, accordion, sailors, fishermen style.
Is that where Osibisa took their name from?
I did tell Teddy Osei and Mac Tonto that, and they sort of denied it. They said, no, it's their own name. But I think they would have met it as children.
Yes.
So by osmotic pressure, they would have known the name, and maybe they didn't realize it's an old fancy name for highlife. But there was other forms. There was Adaha. There was also a music known as Gumbe, which the Ga people call Gome, and so on. So there were these sort of antecedents. And I discovered one of the antecedents of highlife was also non-Ghanaian, which is the crew and the Sierra Leone element coming in through sailors. Crew sailors and Sierra Leone sailors had Africanized the guitar on board sailing ships and steamships back in the 19th century. The music didn't have a specific name, but they were beginning to use African techniques, apply them to the Spanish guitar. And the Spanish guitar, I won't go into the technicalities.
Did you learn how to play all these styles?
Yes. Because
Where's your guitar?
Oh, it's upstairs. I mean, I learned from principally learning on the road, and then Kwame Mensah used to come and stay here a lot with me and taught me his style.
Can we go pick your guitar and then show us some of these things as you're saying them?
I could easily do that for you.
Please.
Okay.
Go for intro. Okay. All right, it's in tune.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me just show you some of the styles that Kwame Mensah taught me.
Yes.
Later on, I was able to play with Konimo because of this.
Konimo himself.
I went on tour with Konimo
Yes, you
of
did.
America
Yes.
once.
I saw it in the book.
But my original teacher was either osmotic pressure by playing with bands and just absorbing.
Yeah.
I didn't really have a teacher, and I only got Kwame Mensah. He was a friend of mine. It was when he was double-crossed by somebody, and I helped him financially. And I said he didn't want to go back to Cape Coast with no money. So I said, why don't you stay with me for a few weeks? Because he'd been staying on and off anyway. And you become my official teacher. So this is what he taught me. So let me give you an example. According to Kwame, this was later confirmed by people like Konimo and others, that the original guitar style in Ghana was introduced by crew sailors from Liberia and Sierra Leone, who took the Spanish guitar. So it was a popular instrument with all types of sailors, the accordion, the penny whistle, portable instruments.
Take it wherever you go.
Yeah. But the Spanish guitar, now the finger pick, we're talking not strumming or picking with a pick, but the finger style. The Spanish, as you know, or maybe you don't, is that you use the thumb and the three fingers. I'm a lefty, but it's called an arpeggio style.
Yes.
It's the basis of classical music, classical guitar music, flamenco. Okay, so what the crew people did is they applied the technique of the way that the African lute is played, the molo or the koligo. It has different names.
Ayisoba's instrument.
Exactly, that type. So that was very popular, even in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And it only uses two fingers. So I call it, for want of a better name, two-finger picking style.
Yes.
So the crew people introduced songs to Ghana because they would mix up with the fishermen, come and docks, Cape Coast and places like that, where they would go into the docks, drink liquor or whatever, and entertain themselves with a guitar. And in fact, Kwame Mensah told me that his uncle, Kwame Asari, that's Jacob Sam, who's considered to be the sort of pioneer of the palm wine guitar style, he was taught by a crew not an ex-sailor, I guess, who landed and stayed in Ghana. And also in Nigeria, by the way. I discovered from a musicologist that one of the earliest styles of Nigerian juju music, which is a type of highlife they have, is called crew bass. So the crew were everywhere. They went all the way down to Angola. Yes.
Okay, so let's hear it.
Okay, this is
as taught you by Kwame San.
Yes, exactly. This is mainline. Very, very simple.
And was that rhythm there? The pa, pa, did it come in at that time?
No.
Not yet?
No, the rhythm they were using was ka, 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 ka.
Okay, so let me do that.
Yeah. Let's see if we can get... Very simple, and then they would have songs to accompany them. Right. There was another one called Dagomba, which is a shortened version of the word Dagomba Waya Tengabu, which was a popular cruise song, which was about the Dagomba ship, not the Dagomba tribe of Ghana, but the Dagomba ship, wiring wire to telegraph Mr. Tengabu. So it became a pop, and so this had a certain guitar riff, which also came
also the same rhythm. Pa, pa,
yes,
pa, pa.
But let me actually just play this one because my hands are a bit stiff. But if you're a guitarist, you will know this style, though most Ghanaians have forgotten its origin. Yep. I've forgotten it. It's a Dagomba. I mean, for instance, even I think Wulo may do a version. So many Ghanaian bands have done versions of this.
That's where they're getting all that from. It's from way back.
And they shortened it to Dagomba.
Okay.
Yeah. And now people have forgotten its origins, including the Liberians. You know, I went with Faisal Helwani to work in his studio in 1983, and I went to interview the people passing through his studio. He was operating there for about 2 years, and I went on radio, and what I'm telling you now about the Liberian contribution to Ghanaian highlife, they were so shocked that the Minister of Culture came to visit me personally and said, "John, are you sure you know what you're saying?" And I said, "It's not that I know what I'm saying, it's that you've forgotten your history, because it was your sailors who introduced the crew, and then I didn't want to say the next thing is because you're elitist, you don't have any consideration for the humbler people contributing to African culture. But this is an example of the crew people making a major contribution. And don't forget, the crew people also invented the Mami water cult, which is all over West Africa.
Yes, all over.
But it started with the Liberians. It was an Africanization of a mermaid with the African sea goddess. And then I think linguists will tell you the earliest form of Pidgin English came from the crews.
Yes.
So they were these so-called humble fishermen were very, very important for the development of African.
Who back even have a song called Crew Brofo? Crew English.
Yes.
Yeah, crew.
Yeah.
Same people.
Yeah.
Okay, so they really contributed a lot to early the music that became highlife.
Only towards the guitar style, highlife. Yeah. Okay. I mean, you see, the thing about highlife is that there are three main varieties. There's the guitar style, there's the brass band style, and there's the ballroom dance orchestra style. And they all have different origins and different clientele. So there's no single, but the term highlife came in the context of the ballroom dance orchestras in 1920s, when the street people had to find a name for their songs being orchestrated by high-class Ghanaian, not European, Ghanaian bands. and they gave it the name high-class life music, Highlife music. But this was going on before that.
Yes.
You know, the crew, the CB Saba style was going on. So what happened is that the crew people, when they came to Ghana, they taught people like Kwame Mensah's uncle. This would be around maybe 1910, 1920, something like that. We're not quite sure because it wasn't well documented. But then the Ghanaians used this technique to develop their own styles. And one of them was Yam Ponsa.
Okay.
And this is where the triple offbeat comes in. Ka, 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 ka. And so that's because that seems to be an indigenous Ghanaian rhythm. It's not found in Nigeria.
It's not?
No. Well, it is now because of Highlife.
Yes.
But no, that triple offbeat seems, I mean, it's related to Akan forms of music like Sitchi or the forerunners of Sitchi music. They use that sort of triple offbeat played on the bell. So instead of using the ka, 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 which is a sort of a universal black transatlantic rhythm, it's found in West Africa, in the Caribbean, it's found in Brazil, it's found in New Orleans. It's a sort of a universal African rhythm, if I can put it that way.
Yes.
This is what the youth now call Jama. And it's the basis, by the way, of Afrobeats. That's why Afrobeats is doing so well, because one of the major rhythms of Afrobeats, modern Afrobeats, is the ba, 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 ba.
And it's found in Brazil, it's found in Cuba, it's found in
New
Angola,
Orleans.
New Orleans.
Yes, it's already had the foundation laid rhythmically.
So it's already Pan-African.
It's already, in fact, it's a black transatlantic.
Black transatlantic.
Yeah, rhythm, and we don't know when it started, but we could probably say that it's a transmutation of a universal African rhythm. Actually, there is one African rhythm which goes. Okay, let's say we take the one that we're talking about, Jama.
Yes.
Okay. Ba 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 ba. Okay, but that's a modification of this rhythm.
The 12/8 thing.
Yeah.
Adowa and Kete.
Yeah.
Agbaja.
And this is found in practically 80% of African countries in different modified forms, whether Agbaja, Adowa, or whatever, or Konkon in Nigeria. And what seems to have happened is when the slaves, you know, there's this story, which is true, that the whites in the Americas would kill African Americans who could play, let's say, for playing the drums, talking drums, communicate, like in Haiti, the Haitian Revolution. The only successful revolution against the white system was successful because it was launched by the Voodoo Rebellion, in which they used talking drums as a form of communication, which was superior to the French. There were no electronics in those days. So they actually defeated the French. 60,000 French people died. The fleet, Napoleon went berserk, by the way.
Couldn't believe it.
Yeah, he tore his hair out. I mean, because how could these people, so-called primitives, destroy the French fleet? And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that the French lost the Battle of Trafalgar. It was about 6 or 7 years after they were defeated by the Haitians. They had lost part of their fleet. Their fleet couldn't stand up to the British. This is a secret part of history that people don't realize, that the Haitians dealt a deadly blow to the French.
Yeah, which reverberated long after the event.
Otherwise we'd all be French speaking now, you know.
Exactement.
So, so we're saying about the banning of drums, which, except in the Catholic areas, it wasn't so bad. I mean, the Catholics were a little bit more tolerant of African customs because the Santeria cults, you know, worshipping African gods as saints. But the Protestants were the most ruthless racists in slavery. So they would actually kill an African American who played drums, or could read or write for that matter. But it wasn't just because the drum could talk. That was deadly enough, you know, messages between slaves, rebellion. It was that the types of rhythms used in Africa for religious or ritual or ancestor worship were the 6/8 rhythms. So they wanted to ban the 6. Well, they did. They banned the 6/8 rhythms.
The 6/8 is a pa 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 pa.
Yeah,
pa,
or,
okay.
Or 12/8
12/8.
if you want to call it 12/8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So what happened is that they banned both the 12/8 rhythms and the talking drums. So what the African Americans did in different countries, in North and South America and even the Caribbean, is they took a safe European 4/4 tempo and put the rhythm inside it. They compressed, they squashed the rhythm. So the ga 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 is basically in 6/8 time. It would be it's still
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. But if you played it like that, you're
Cut
dead.
your head off.
But if you played it in safe European time, it was accepted.
Yes.
But it was still actually a partly African rhythm because it's full of syncopations, but it's not polyrhythmic. So this is why this rhythm is found all over the place, I think, you know.
So
this
the triple three, that was the like.
that was a Ghanaian rhythm specifically, yes. I'm sure if you go to Ghanaian, Nigerian, and talk to a Nigerian scholar like Austin Emeelu, he will tell you that there are certain Igbo rhythms used in Igbo Highlife, which are distinctly Igbo or distinctly Yoruba. So, but that old one, ba, I don't even know what to call it. Some people call it calypso, some people call it Highlife. Now the youth will call it Jama, whatever you want to call it. That one was all over the place. You can't even say which came first, the chicken or the egg, you know, except maybe it had an African prototype in 6/8 or 12/8 time. But this is all speculation. Because we never have documentation of this. But the interesting thing is that when it came to the Ghanaians, they would then use some of their indigenous. They regionalized the cruise style and made it Ghanaian. So one way they put it in a Ghanaian rhythm. So
Cat.
and that's the basis of the Yamponsa. Look, if I play the Yamponsa, it's the same style as the crew.
Yeah, two thinkers. So this is Yamponsa.
Yeah.
What are the words saying in this one?
Yamponsa was actually, she was a beautiful woman. She was the sister of one of the members of the, it was called the Kumasi Trio. But they all were all Cape Coast guys who were working in Kumasi. And that's Kwame Asari and the others. There were three of them from Cape Coast and Salt Pond who were working in Kumasi. And then they were going into the cocoa areas during the cocoa season, playing this music in small villages to ballroom music, to ballroom dancing. That was the novelty that they brought in at that time. So it was, they called it Sibi Saba at that time. They were calling this music Sibi Saba or Sibi Saba. And they traveled around, and then Yamponsa would introduce the ballroom dance steps, because the original dance of Sibi Saba was a ring dance, like Bobobo, that type of style.
Around.
Yeah. So it was later that they, as a new fashion, you know, the thing about Highlife musicians are they're incredibly eclectic and cosmopolitan, far more cosmopolitan than any intellectual. I have to say this, or maybe not, I shouldn't say more, but as because they were.
So they're open to receiving new ideas.
Yes, and sometimes if they see a new fashion, they'll put it into their show. So the new fashion was the Western way of doing a ballroom dance in the villages. So Yamponsa was the person who did it and showed the village people how to dance.
She was a real person.
Yes, yes. And the song, I mean, I even have seen a picture of her once, but I can't get hold of it now. A very beautiful lady of the 1920s, beautiful in an African way, not anorexic, but well, you know.
Proportioned.
Endowed. And she got into a lot of trouble because she was charging the village men pennies to teach them to dance. So she got a bad reputation as an ashau, but she wasn't. She wasn't anything like that. And the song itself, I think, was banned by some maybe Christians or educationalists. And Ephraim Amu had to write a new version of it because he loved the song, the rhythm, the melody. So he wrote something about it's time to go out, it's I don't know, holiday time or something, or school is over, we should go out and play. He had to write.
But the lyrics were more saltier than that.
Yeah, they had mentions of Bentwa. And things like that, and pepper douches, and yes, I mean it was considered to be a vulgar street song.
Who composed it?
We don't know for sure. This came up with the folklore board about because Paul Simon used a version of it. So what we had to ascertain was who actually wrote it, and so the folklore board wanted to say it was a folklore board song, but we couldn't. We said that, I think, because we couldn't absolutely be certain that Kwame Asari wrote it, because it looks as if there were earlier versions. There's references to the song as early as 1918, and Kwame Asari recorded Yamponsa in 1928. So it seems to have been a song that was a street song. We don't know who actually invented it, but definitely it was a Ghanaian.
So this rhythm became, this style of playing guitars became really, really popular.
Yeah, it's like if you're a blues guitarist, you have the 12-bar blues,
Yes.
one of the stand.
Yes.
It became something like that for Ghanaian Highlife, but of course there are other styles as well.
So this is one of the standards for Highlife.
Yes.
If you're a Highlife guitarist, you must know how to play.
Yes, you have to play mainline, dagomba, and yamponsa.
Refresh our minds again. Play us play main line for me.
Well, this is very, it's...
Okay, so this main line.
And then,
Dagomba.
and then yamponsa.
Yamponsa. So this is like the vocabulary of a Highlife guitarist.
Well,
now.
not exactly, because we haven't completed the story.
Okay.
There was one extra thing that
Right.
happened. This guitar, all this was happening on the coast where fishermen and sailors gathered. But the guitar is a relatively cheap instrument, and it moved into Kwau, to Ashanti, Brongahafo, the Akan hinterland, let's call it, or rural areas. And it met an instrument that was already there called the separawa. But it basically gradually superseded the separawa as a stringed instrument. But it took over a lot of the separawa music. And in fact, it became called the same name as the separawa music, called adonson. I mean, the person who told me all about this was Konimo. Now this is much, much more African. You see, the thing is, all the styles I've just played you, even though they're using an African technique of fingering the guitar, we're all using Western harmonic progressions, 1, 3, 1, 1, 4, 5, etc. But when it came to the adonson style, it's concentrated more on the modal, moving between two tone centers, a full tone apart. Let's say between the F and the G. And a lot of Akan music moves between, it's a modal style that runs between two tones which are one tone apart.
Let's hear what it sounds like.
Yeah,
So tone apart.
yeah. And then they would rhythmatize it either in 4/4 time or 6/8 time. So let me give you an example in
Yes.
6/8. Yeah. Yeah.
And could they also do this with 4/4?
Yes, yes. Let me see.
So this is when the hinterland influenced the music.
Yes, and that became, and then collectively, all of it became called palm wine music, whether from the coast, whether in 6/8 or with modal style or normal chordal style.
Why palm wine? Why not Takpeteshi?
Well, because palm wine's been around longer than I've heard.
Takpeteshi.
You know, palm wine. I think Africans domesticated a palm tree about 3,000 years ago.
Okay,
So it was long before the Dutch came with their
schnapps.
schnapps.
So there's a great
But
granddaddy.
but it's a good question, because the thing is that this village style, as it percolated into the village, was played in palm wine bars.
Ah.
And then the name palm wine was probably invented in the 1940s. The reason I say this is that they wouldn't have had to have a special name. It was with the invention of the electric guitar. The amplified guitar, the dance band guitar, started to come into Africa in the 1940s. And some of the guitar bands, I mean, even Ike Nyamis and Kakeku, by the 50s they were beginning to use amplified guitar. So they wanted to have a different name for their style as distinct from the older style. So that you could have called the old style box guitar, but they called it palm wine style. The same thing happened in the Congo. When the electric guitar came, the electric guitar, when it came to Ghana or the Congo or to Nigeria, it didn't in any way destroy African traditions. It just gave them another medium. But they had to find a word for the old type of guitar or styles played on acoustic guitars. So in the Congo they call it the dry guitar style, as opposed to the electric. Here we call it palm wine music. And I think that's a word that was also used in Sierra Leone and Nigeria as well. By the 1940s you start to see the word palm wine being used. But I think it was because of Bobby Benson, for instance, brought the first electric guitar to Nigeria in 1948, or amplified guitar. So you have to distinguish between,
Exactly.
I think this is how
That's
it
what
happened.
happened.
Yeah.
So from what you said so far, we've gotten influences from the Crew people, Sierra Leone, Liberia, then music from these Fanti musicians who deliver, and then the music went.
There's another style also from Nigeria and Sierra Leone called asiko, or ashiko.
Ashiko.
And that seems to have been a style that was coming from the ex-Yoruba slaves in Freetown who were captured by the British, freed by the British and settled, and then also in Nigeria, Yoruba land itself. So there was another style that was also played on guitars.
What did it sound like?
Very much like Highlife.
Okay.
And in fact, Kwame Mensah told me that his father played ashiko guitar and accordion. Again, it seems to be the fisherman, sailor influence coming in with the accordion. Of course, the guitar is the one that's remained paramount, but you still get, I think in Ivory Coast, you still get some of its palm wine music. They use accordion or concertina. It's a sailor's instrument.
Yes.
So this is why it's very difficult to say. The only thing we can safely say is that the word Highlife was invented in Ghana, and the precursors to Highlife are partly from Ghana, mainly from Ghana, I would say, but there's this influence coming in from Nigerian ashiko music and Liberian crew music. So right from the very beginning, Highlife was pan-West African, but it sort of crystallized as a genre in Ghana. And then, of course, it was popularized by E.T. Mensah and these ballroom dance orchestras, which were the ones that took Highlife, with the name Highlife, to Nigeria in 1938. The Cape Coast Sugar Babies was in Nigeria in 1938. E.T. Mensah followed up in the early 50s. So this is how the Highlife spread into Nigeria. And it's become so indigenized in Nigeria that there are a dozen, well, I don't know how many, I think this Nigerian scholar, Austin Emeelu, says there's around about 17 or 18 distinct styles of Highlife in Nigeria today, because it's had 80 years, to percolate into the different ethnic groups.
I'm curious, does Highlife have any influences from northern Ghana and from like the Ewe people as well?
No, there's a very strange, let's talk about the north. The Highlife is a southern Ghanaian phenomenon. There's no evidence that Highlife, we know some of the concert parties that started to travel. Some of them went to Tamale in the 1930s, but there was you could say Highlife was a sort of a reaction to the cross-fertilization between the white culture and the African culture. It was bound to have started on the coast, not in the Sahara Desert.
You had white people there.
Yeah, and I would even go as far as saying that, well, I know this for a fact, when I was young in Ghana playing bands, there was literally no northern presence in popular music in Ghana, except for a few people I can mention by name. They were so few. This is before Atongo Zimba and King Ayasoba. We're talking about in the 50s and 60s. The only Highlife dance band which was from the north was the Delta Dandies, but they came from northern Nigeria. And they would play Hausa Highlife in the 50s. But there was, I think there was a stronger northern Highlife in Nigeria because of the predominance of the northern people in Nigeria. But in Ghana, the closest you could possibly say was there was a type of music in Yendi and Tamale in the 1930s called Simpa. And Simpa was very much like Palogo and Bobobo.
Very rhythmic.
Yeah, and a mixture of traditional drumming plus Highlife rhythms. But Highlife is a distinct, in fact, I think the first important band in Ghana that was the Uppers Internationals. I think they were and I knew some of those guys, like Prince Ali. So it wasn't really till quite much later that you got the development of a northern version of Highlife. And in fact, to be honest, I would even say that the reason for the upsurge in northern popular music today, with so many of the hip lifers, Afrobeat, coming from the north, is because of Rawlings.
How do you say that? Why do you say that?
Because he put electricity into Tamale in 1987. There was no electricity, so there was no interface where this type of sort of interaction could occur.
For the influences to occur.
Yeah. And there were a few exceptions. There was a guy called Onipanua, who actually recorded in my studio many years ago. Yes, but he was sort of a blind beggar.
Yes.
He wasn't really a high life genre
Produced by
person.
Faisal Hewani, right?
Yeah, but Faisal discovered him. That's how Tongo used to lead him, because Onipanua was blind. So Tongo Zimba was his leader, guide. Yeah. And then there was Charlotte Dada, who was with the Uppers International, and one or two. And then there's Amo Azangio, who appears on the Soul to Soul film when the Black Americans came in 1970. You see, there's so few that I know all of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
How about from the Volta region side of Ghana?
That's the other side. This is the great mystery. You know, when this noise pollution started in this area, I had a studio here, and before I was teaching at Legon, I moved my studio, made it mobile, and I used to go to the Volta region a lot, particularly around Ho and Chito and those places, and I did a lot of recordings there. And I was also, by this time, that was the 1980s, I would say that the closest thing to Highlife in the Volta region, which is old, is Bobobo. Because Bobobo was Atrikwi, it was the old types of, is it not, not Atrikwi, what is it?
Gahu?
No, yeah, but not Gahu, that's, they had an indigenous recreational music. I've forgotten the name, but the name Bobobo, they also were playing Konkoma, which is a type of Highlife, which I didn't even mention. It's a sort of poor man's version of brass band Adaha music. Okay. So the poor people couldn't afford the instruments, so they made do with local instruments. They called it Konkoma, and it spread all the way into Nigeria in the 1930s. But it was very much looked down upon, like so much youth music of the time. But the Konkoma spread into the Volta region as it went into Nigeria, and I've got pictures from one of my students, my MPhil students, who did some research in Chito and got me pictures of a Konkoma band in the 1940s in Chito, wearing uniform. Because it's like a brass band, so you wear some type of uniform. But it seems that what happened in Pandu is that there was this guy called Nuatro, who's, funnily enough, one of his grand nephews or maybe grandsons actually was one of my students. But this was documented. Nuatro is the person who's meant to have invented Bobobo when he indigenized the Konkoma into an Ewe form, and used the Ewe drums instead of the tambourine, the square drums. Exactly. I'm just trying to remember the name, Akpese. Yes. So they had the Akpese, and then it became sort of, you see, the musicians are so open to change and novelty, cosmopolitanism. They're willing to change, the time, 1950s, it was a time of change in Ghana. The youth were interested in independence. And in fact, I think Nuatro's Bobobo was actually called Nkrumah's own Bobobo. Nice. They gave it a name.
Good branding.
Yeah. And Simpa, I've got these Simpa songs coming from Dagbon in the 1930s, and then by the late 1940s, they were also writing songs about Nkrumah during that time. So there's an interface between popular Ghanaian music and traditional Ghanaian music, so that we have, and Palogo is another example of the Gas. It was invented around about 1962, and you might say, how do I know all this? Because my first wife was actually a dancer in O2 Lincoln's original Palogo group, which was doing the same thing, taking Ga drums, not Ewe, not Dagbon, but the local Ga drums, and where they have music like Kolamashi and Gome, and then modernizing it with some beats from Highlife, and also moves from the chubby checker and the twist, rock and roll.
Oh, wow. So there were all kinds of influences were coming into it.
And it was banned. Palogo was banned in Ghana for 2 years. Yes. Arts Council and some of the elders thought it was indecent.
All the shaking of the
Yeah.
rear.
So they,
A bit like Bobo. It's
Yeah.
also shaking.
yes,
Yeah.
but I think
Bobo was never banned.
I don't think so. No, I think because it was taking place in more provincial areas.
Yes, far away from the city.
Yeah, but this was happening in the heart of Accra, and the Arts Council was breathing down their necks. And in fact, it became such a. I mean, they were actually arresting people playing palogo, and putting them in jail.
Wow.
Yes.
Jailed for dancing.
Yes, because they used to do these little dance dramas with palogo, which were very rude about elderly people and school teachers or government officials.
Yes, indeed.
So they were subversive.
Yes, sending messages through the music.
But you know what? You know who solved the problem? Nkrumah. He had heard about this sort of underground tension going on with the youth, not with rock and roll, but with this thing, Ga music. I suppose you could say it was slightly influenced by rock and roll, but it was a Ghanaian phenomenon, a Ga phenomenon. So he called for a durbar at the, I think, football stadium, and maybe they toned down their dances a little bit. And he said, oh, this is all good African stuff.
Let it go.
Let it go. So we have palogo.
And-
So it's interesting when you're talking about Highlife that there's a whole realm of Highlife, which is the impact of Highlife on indigenous forms of ongoing music. So traditional music isn't dead and gone, it can be revived.
Yes, recycled and
Yeah.
reborn.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there were 3 strands of Highlife. There's another strand, which is the brass band.
Yeah, that's
element.
the
So
old.
it's like guitar.
Yeah, the
and now-
brass band was the first.
brass band was older than guitar.
Yes, because it was. Here comes another very interesting thing. The Ghanaian members of the British colonial army have been trained to play British umpa, white man's tune or rhythm. Since the 1830s, we have evidence in Cape Coast of a native orchestra, which would have been a brass band. But we have no evidence that they ever either decided or were allowed to play African music. They were being brainwashed by the whites. Then something happened that completely changed this. The British, because this was called the white man's grave, and a lot of the white soldiers, the Ghanaian soldiers didn't die. That's why they recruited Ghanaian soldiers into the British colonial army. But the other people they brought in was West Indians from English-speaking Caribbean. And altogether, they brought around, we don't know the exact figures, but around about 6,000 West Indians were brought to Cape Coast and Elmina over the Ashanti Wars. So during that 30-year period, in batches of 200, and they brought Caribbean music. They brought calypso. So what happened is that the Ghanaians who were playing the official brass band music, Western style, suddenly saw black marching bands, syncopated music, syncopated dancing, marching about the streets of Cape Coast and Elmina, and they copied them. And they copied some of the Caribbean tunes. And one of these tunes became Everybody Likes Saturday Night.
Everybody likes Saturday night. Yeah. That came from the Caribbean.
Yes.
Everybody
Yeah.
likes Saturday
And
night.
the other song was All For You, which was originally called Sly Mongoose. It was a Caribbean song.
Oh, the E.T. Mensah song?
It's not E.T. Mensah's. E.T. told me himself that he did not write it.
Wow.
You know,
It was called Sly Mongoose.
yes, it was popularized in the 1920s by records.
Okay.
And there was a group probably in Accra called the West African Quintet, was doing an instrumental version of what we now call All For You, or Sly Mongoose, back in the 1920s. So and I've even got a version, the earliest version of All For You, which was sung in the 1940s by a woman from Liberia. And the words is about All For You Baby, and it's a woman talking about her boyfriend taking her to somewhere in Monrovia and trying to slit her throat and knock her on the head with a hammer.
Really violent lyrics, right?
Yeah, very violently. So, but
Wouldn't survive on radio.
no. So E.T. did a more polished version.
Sanitized version.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that
But
influence from the West Indies.
You see
and
the-
then the military music.
Yeah, and the reason why the West Indians were so important is they acted as a stepping stone for African brass band musicians to go into their own culture, because maybe the whites definitely wouldn't have encouraged, let's say, black soldiers in Ghana to play African tunes. You know, they're being brainwashed by the whites. But when the West Indians were there, then everything changed, because it meant that they're copying the West Indians, which are Afro-Caribbean. It's only like a stepping stone.
Yes.
The next step, and in fact, the West Indians came, I think, in 1872 at the beginning of the Ashanti Wars. by about 15, 20 years later, Adaha had been born, which meant that what had happened is the normal process with Black American music. The Ghanaians fall in love with it, copy it, copycat syndrome, and then they find their own voice.
And then it becomes something new.
Yeah, so it's like Afro dancehall. You know, they copy dancehall, now they call it Afro dancehall, and so on. So it was a very interesting development. So that's actually occurred before the emergence of CB Saba. So it seems to have been the first, what we would now call Highlife, but it didn't. It was called Adaha music or Adaha bands.
Some of these Highlife songs have like a walking bass, the boom, doom, doom, doom. Was that coming from the Oompa Oompa, the brass band stuff?
That I don't know. I mean, the thing is that you could say that it was because of all Highlife was dance oriented or marching
kind of 4/4.
Yes,
okay.
It may be that. I'm not sure. One of my students have written a paper, a bass player. I mean, Fish. Do you know Fish? Mark Villas at Cape Coast. He's the teacher at Cape Coast now. Sorry, at Winneba. I think he wrote about this changes in the bass because there's a big difference between the walking bass that you also find in E.T. Menson type of Highlife as well.
All for You has a walking bass, right?
Yes, exactly. But you don't. Where you find differences from the walking bass is in the guitar band Highlife. So that the guitar band is one of the main streams of. In fact, I would say, looking in retrospect, that the most dominant form of Highlife in Ghana was always the guitar bands and concert parties. They even had their own separate union, trade union under Nkrumah. They had about 150 such, itinerant groups. This is the type of music I fell in with. And there were only about 120 dance bands. So even by numbers alone,
the concert party
was the heart and soul, really. And that was considered to be the lowest of the low by the university. In fact, if I had been playing with E.T. Menson's band and wearing a suit and tie, I probably wouldn't have been condemned by African Studies for sleeping on the floor.
With the concert party people?
Yeah.
Because you played for a long time with the concert party.
Yeah, it's on and off for years. In fact, I formed a band that was basically a concert party, myself in the end.
What would you say is the contribution of concert party to the development of Highlife?
Well, up to a certain point, the three strands of Highlife, which would be the brass bands, the guitar bands, and then the ballroom dance orchestras come dance bands like E.T. Menson, they were completely separate. There was very little leakage between them because each had its own clientele, its own. For instance, there were two music unions in Ghana under Nkrumah. It wasn't Nkrumah's idea. The musicians refused to form a united musicians union. So the dance band musician, suit and tie, literate musician, formed theirs, and let's call them the bush musicians, formed the concert party one. And there was it's only on a few occasions the Ramblers, I think, borrowed some popular Highlife songs from the guitar bands. But there was a very big difference in style of playing. The guitar bands often didn't use walking bass, they used counterpoint bass.
What does a counterpoint bass sound like?
It would be like a counter melody in the bass to the other guitars, and they would have three. Let's say they would have a tenor, an alto, and a bass guitar, but they weren't organized harmonically, as in Europe, like a basso continuo type of structured hierarchical. It would be polyphonic or counterpoint. Each melody would be, it would be sort of, I won't say cross purposes, but cross connections. I mean, this is why I fell in love with. I was very lucky to meet guitar bands before I met dance bands, because the guitar bands, I was introduced to a philosophy of African music which is found in drumming, which is the use of counterpoint drums, let's call it that. There's no single universal dominant melody. No. Everybody has it. It's the most, it's the most democratic system of music making, that you can imagine. Well, I met this with the guitar bands back in those days. I remember asking one of the people in the Jaguar Jokers or Love Naughty's band, who's the lead guitarist? And they said, we don't have a lead guitarist. We have a tenor, we have an alto, we have a bass. They're playing different voices.
And it all meshes together.
Yes. So, and they didn't say this to me, but I much later realized that they were drawing this philosophy of guitarism. I've written a paper called African Guitarism on this, about the most African side, or Ghanaian side, of Highlife was actually the guitar bands, because they were also using these modal systems instead of Western harmonies. I'm not trying to say one is better than the other.
No, it's just different, and you can appreciate all.
Yes, yes. But the one that was closer to the indigenous culture, and also it's in the guitar bands that you get the recitative, the storylines. You know, Nana Ampedu talking for half an hour about Abitie, Abintie, or whatever.
Yeah, and a lot of proverbs.
Yes,
Yeah.
and not, you know, so whereas the more westernized dance bands, E.T. Mensah, would be organized into stanzas, chorus, verse, and this type of thing. So in terms, it was, I mean, I just happened to fall in with the guitar bands because of my stepmother. I could have, more likely would have fallen in with university bands. And I wouldn't have, I think, appreciated the music too, because I'm basically an anarchist politically. I like freedom, and I found music where there was no lead guitarist, and I was sick of Western music. You see, Western music always wants to elevate certain individuals above the rest. It's a regimented system where you have the first violinist or the virtuoso or the conductor, you know, and then it percolated into rock and roll. So I was in a rock and roll band, a youth band, but we had the same structure. We had the lead singer, I was the rhythm guitarist. I came to Africa, I found that, at least with guitar bands, in those days, not now, but those days, the guitar bands were very democratically organized musically, but off stage, they were very hierarchical. They had a treasurer, a leader, but when they went on stage, freedom reigns. Dancing, freedom, improvisation.
It all reigns.
Yeah.
The third strand is the ballroom type of high life.
Yes.
Just describe that a little bit for us.
Well, that was the sort of what predates the E.T. Mensah dance band. The dance bands came out of that milieu, but the ballroom dance orchestras go, the earliest one we know about in Ghana is about 1914. And they were playing then no high life, no African music. These were guys totally brainwashed by white culture. Waltzes, polkas, you know, and so on. And ragtime music, of course, was very
jazz,
popular.
danceable.
Yeah, jazz really, it was, at that time, yeah, anyway, jazz was beginning to come in, but it was more the early form of ragtime jazz. But anyway, there was a band in Ghana called Raga Jazzbo, and there was a band called the Jazz Kings in 1916. So there was that jazz influence, but not African music. And then somewhere, we don't know the exact date, I talked to Frank Torto, who ran the Excelsior Orchestra, and I asked him, when did you start orchestrating some of your street songs, your local songs? And he said, well, I think he told me the date was in the very early 1920s, maybe 21 or 22, but we didn't give it the name Highlife, we gave it the name Selections. But then lo and behold, by 1925, the word Highlife appears.
Who is responsible for that word?
Well, I can only tell you what E.T. Mensah's older brother told me. And E.T. Mensah's, Yeboah Mensah was the leader of the Accra Rhythmic Orchestra, which the small boy E.T. Mensah had belonged to. He told me what happened was that by the 1920s, just by osmotic pressure or something, the local street songs, call them CB Saba or Adaha songs or Gome songs or Ashiko songs, were being orchestrated by the high-class orchestras. A few. They didn't concentrate on this local music, but an old lady once told me, who was young in the 1920s, that it was all strict ballroom dancing, but there was a time when they let their hair down and did freestyle dancing or conga lines. And that's when they brought in the high life. It was more like a free-form music, like light relief. But the thing is, there was no name for it. And what Yeboah Mensah told me was the name was actually invented by the poor people outside who went for a free party, you know, with their wives or girlfriends, because they could have a free dance outside, eat kelly welly or whatever, and not spend a lot of money. And then lo and behold, they heard their own music from maybe the very early 20s. So they invented the name Highlife, high-class life music.
High-class life music.
But the word wasn't invented by the high-class musicians. And this led to a problem when Highlife went to Nigeria, because quite a lot of Nigerian musicians supposed that Highlife music actually started with the rich people inventing it, and then it's sort of percolating down to the poor people.
Which is not so.
No, it's completely the other way around.
Other way around.
Yeah.